The first time I saw Elias Ward's name in 38 years, it was glowing beneath mine. My son Colin stood beside the radiologist in a dark conservation room while a digital image of the violin filled the monitor. The instrument looked ghostly in black and silver. Its spruce top had disappeared into shades of gray. The bass bar, corner blocks, and old repair cleats floated inside it like bones. The auction specialist leaned toward the screen. "Can you enlarge the label area?" she asked. Dr. Mira Shah moved a cursor over the lower bout. Everyone in the room knew what the visible label said. It had been photographed for books, insurance reports, and exhibition catalogs. Arthur Hale, Springfield, Massachusetts, 1988. My name, my workshop, my date. Mira adjusted the contrast. A second rectangle emerged beneath the paper label, slightly crooked and almost the same size. Iron in the older ink had responded differently to the low-energy X-ray. At first, the buried writing was only a dark curl, then she sharpened it. Elias Ward. Colin stopped breathing for a moment. The auction specialist looked at me. "Who is Elias Ward?" I was 69 years old. I had built or restored more than 900 instruments. A quartet bearing my name played in concert halls on 3 continents. The violin on the table was considered the finest instrument I had ever made, and in 6 weeks it was supposed to be sold at a charity auction for at least $400,000. But I had not designed it. I had not carved most of it. And I knew exactly why another man's name was trapped beneath mine. "He was my apprentice," I said. Colin turned from the monitor. "Was?" The way he asked told me he already knew more than he had ever admitted. "My name is Arthur Hale. I began repairing violins in the back room of a music store when I was 19. By 27, I had borrowed enough money to open Hale Stringed Instruments in a narrow brick storefront near the old train station. The shop smelled of spruce shavings, hot hide glue, coffee, and whatever varnish was drying beneath the window. For most of my career, I believed a maker's name meant more than ownership. It meant responsibility. If an instrument carried my label, every arch, joint, and brush stroke was a promise that I would answer for the work. Then Elias built a violin capable of saving my shop, and I decided responsibility included taking credit for it. Colin had organized the auction after my cardiologist told me to stop spending 10-hour days bent over a bench. The sale would benefit the Barlow School of Music, a non-profit program where children borrowed instruments their families could not afford. I had taught there on Saturdays for 20 years. Colin served on its board. The violin was known as the Hale number, 42, though it was only the 36th instrument I had actually sold. It had a one-piece maple back cut with deep, narrow flame and a top made from alpine spruce that seemed to hold light beneath its surface. The varnish was dark amber over gold. Players described the sound as focused under the ear and enormous at the back of a hall. I sold it in 1988 to concertmaster Julian Sorrell for $18,000. He played it for 34 years. When he died, his widow returned it to me under an agreement we had made when he bought it. If the instrument was ever sold, I would have the first opportunity to place it with another serious player. I could not afford its current value. Julian's widow, Margaret, proposed the charity auction instead. She would donate half the proceeds to Barlow, and the buyer would loan the violin to the school's most promising graduate every 3 years. It was the kind of ending instrument makers dream about. Colin made it into an event. He hired a respected auction house, arranged a performance at the Symphony Hall, and persuaded a foundation to cover the buyer's premium. A documentary crew filmed me selecting wood and sharpening gouges. The catalog called Number 42, the uncontested masterpiece of Arthur Hale's golden period. That phrase was printed before the X-ray. High-value instruments are examined in ways that would have seemed absurd when I started. Ultraviolet light reveals varnish repairs. Dendrochronology compares spruce growth rings. Internal cameras inspect blocks and linings. The X-ray was meant to confirm that number 42 had not been thinned, patched, or altered in a way that affected its value. Instead, it found Elias. The auction house suspended the examination before anyone removed a string. Its specialist, Nora Bell, asked Colin and me to remain while her legal department joined by video. Nora pointed at the buried label. Did Mr. Ward make this instrument? I looked through the glass at number 42, resting on a padded cradle. Even after all those years, I could identify Elias's knife work around the purfling. I could see the slightly extended corners he fought me to keep. I had spent a career teaching people to recognize a maker's hand while trusting that nobody would recognize his. Most of it, I said. Colin placed both palms on the table. What does most mean? He designed the model, joined the plates, cut the outline, carved the arching and scroll, installed the base bar, and closed the body. Nora's voice became careful. What did you do? I reset the neck, finished the edgework, varnished it, fitted the bridge and sound post, and adjusted it after it was strung. Nobody in that room needed a percentage. Elias had created the instrument. I had completed it. Colin walked to the far end of the room. He stared at a white wall as if the answer might be projected there. All my life, he said, you told me this was the violin that proved the shop belonged among the great American makers. It did save the shop. That wasn't my question. The story began in 1984 when Elias Ward came through my door carrying a cello bridge he had carved from the lid of a discarded piano bench. He was 24, thin, quiet, and dressed in a wool coat too heavy for September. He had studied violin performance for 2 years before nerve damage in his left hand ended any hope of playing professionally. He could still hold tools. More important, he could see curves. That may sound like a small gift. It is not. A violin is built from measurements, but a great one emerges from relationships no ruler can settle. The rise of the arch must speak to the width of the waist. The scroll has to turn with energy without looking hurried. Elias could glance at a block of maple and understand which instrument was waiting inside it. I hired him for 3 mornings a week, sweeping floors and preparing glue. Within 6 months, he was sharpening my knives better than I did. Within a year, he was repairing student instruments. He kept notebooks filled with arching diagrams, plate thicknesses, and sketches of old Cremonese instruments he had studied in photographs. He questioned everything. I taught a broad, conservative model based on a 1715 Stradivari. Elias wanted a slightly fuller center arch, stronger edges, and narrower upper bouts. He believed modern halls demanded projection without sacrificing warmth. We argued constantly. Those arguments made the work better. In 1986, I allowed him to begin an instrument of his own after regular shop hours. The wood belonged to me. The tools and forms belonged to me. Elias contributed his labor, his design, and the private certainty that the result would someday carry his name. We never signed an agreement. That failure became useful to me later. Elias selected a one-piece maple back I had been saving for myself. I almost refused, but he showed me how the flame changed direction near the lower bout and explained how he would tilt the outline to make it appear alive beneath varnish. He was right. He drew a new mold, he bent the ribs, he cut the narrow black and white purfling by hand. I corrected him when he worked too fast and criticized the extended corners until he threatened to shorten them simply to stop hearing my voice. By spring of 1987, the violin body was closed and the scroll complete. His initials appeared in pencil beneath the upper block. The label he intended to use read, Elias Ward, Springfield, 1987, made in the workshop of Arthur Hale. I saw it on his bench and felt something I did not admit until much later. Jealousy. My apprentice's first original violin had cleaner purfling than my 10th. The arching carried strength without heaviness. When I tapped the unfinished body, the wood answered with a clear, ringing note that seemed to go on after the room became quiet. I was proud of him. I was also afraid of what his talent said about mine. In June, Elias received a call at the shop. His younger sister Ruth had collapsed at work in Baltimore. Doctors found a tumor near her brainstem. Elias left that afternoon with one suitcase and told me he would return in 2 weeks. He did not. Ruth survived surgery but needed months of rehabilitation. Elias wrote 3 times. The first letter asked me to keep the violin safe. The second said he had taken repair work at a music store to pay rent. The third arrived 5 months later and said he did not know when he could come back. If you need the bench, he wrote, pack my things. Please do not let anyone touch the violin. I want to finish it when Ruth can manage without me. At that moment, Hale's stringed instruments was failing. A pipe had burst in the apartment above us, ruining tone wood and 3 customer instruments. Our insurer disputed the claim because the landlord had ignored earlier leaks. Interest rates had climbed. A dealer who owed me $14,000 declared bankruptcy. I had 4 employees, including 2 young repairers with children, and less than 6 weeks of payroll in the bank. My wife, Ann, kept the books. She showed me the numbers at our kitchen table and said we had to close before our debts swallowed the house. Then Julian Sorrell visited the shop. He had come for a bow rehair. While he waited, he noticed Elias's unfinished violin inside a cabinet. The neck was only temporarily set, the edges needed scraping, and the bare wood had begun to oxidize. Julian asked to hold it. I told him it was not ready. He tapped the body, studied the arching, and asked who had made it. I said, "It was made here." That was the first theft. It sounded like an answer without being one. Julian offered to commission the finished instrument. His patron was prepared to pay $18,000, half in advance, if the violin could be ready for a European tour in 4 months. $18,000 would cover our overdue rent, replace 2 sets of ruined wood, and make payroll through the winter. I wrote Elias a letter explaining the offer. I never mailed it. For 3 nights, I kept the envelope in my coat pocket. I told myself Elias had abandoned the schedule, that the wood belonged to my shop, and that an unfinished violin was inventory rather than art. I told myself I would send him part of the money after the sale. Then I remembered the sentence in his letter, "Please do not let anyone touch the violin." I burned my letter in the wood stove. You may believe desperation leaves people with no choice. What it usually does is make one choice feel so necessary that all the people paying for it become easy to ignore. I removed Elias's label through the end pin opening. It would not come free cleanly because he had attached it before closing the body. A thin layer remained glued to the rib. I covered it with one of my printed labels dated 1988. Then I finished the violin. I did real work. The neck angle was too low, so I removed and reset it. I refined the channel around the edge, corrected a small asymmetry in the fingerboard alignment, and spent 9 months developing the varnish. The first coat was too red. I stripped part of it and began again. I fitted 4 bridges before the response balanced across all strings. Without those decisions, number 42 would not sound exactly as it does. But completing a sentence does not make a man the author of every word before it. When Julian first played the finished violin in our shop, Anne cried. The G string had depth, the E string carried without becoming sharp, and chords remained clear under pressure. Julian paid the balance that afternoon. The money saved us. Nobody lost a job. The shop survived the winter. Julian played the instrument during a nationally broadcast concert the following year, and orders began arriving. By 1991, I had a waiting list. By 1995, collectors referred to my late 80s instruments as the beginning of my mature period. There was no mature period. There was one extraordinary violin designed by Elias, followed by years of my trying to understand why it worked. I used his fuller center arch in later instruments. I narrowed my upper bouts. I kept my own corners shorter, but even that choice was made in conversation with his design. Elias returned to the shop in September of 1989. I had imagined the moment so many times that the real one felt strangely ordinary. He was thinner. His hair had begun to gray at the temples. He brought Ruth with him, walking slowly with a cane. The cabinet where the unfinished violin had rested was empty. He asked where it was. I told him the shop had completed and sold it to cover storage, materials, and unpaid training expenses. He stared at me as though I had spoken in a language he did not understand. "Whose label is inside?" he asked. I said the instrument belonged to the Hale workshop because it had been constructed on my premises with my wood. Ruth sat in a chair near the door. Elias lowered his voice so she would not hear us argue. "I drew that model," he said. "I carved those plates. And I made it playable. Did you put my name on it?" I did not answer. He asked to see the sale invoice. I refused. He asked for a share of the price. I offered him $600, which I calculated from the apprentice wages he might have earned for the hours he had recorded. He did not take it. Elias removed his tools from the bench. Before leaving, He placed a photograph on my work table. Anne had taken it the summer before Ruth's illness. Elias stood by the window holding the unvarnished violin against his chest. The scroll, corners, and one-piece back were unmistakable. On the white border he wrote, "You know whose hands made this." I kept the photograph. That may sound like guilt. Part of it was. Another part was arrogance. I believed possession of the evidence proved I was not afraid of it. Elias never sued. He had no contract, no copy of the label, and no money for an attorney. He moved to Baltimore permanently and eventually opened a repair shop specializing in school instruments. He made only 3 more violins. None received the attention number 42 did. For years I told people he had been a promising apprentice who left before completing his training. I did not say his name in connection with the violin. Colin was 7 when Elias left. He remembered almost nothing about him. He grew up sweeping the same floors and listening to players praise number 42. Unlike me, Colin never wanted to build instruments. He understood people, money, and stories. He turned the workshop into a successful brand without ever learning to sharpen a gouge. The photograph remained in a flat file beneath old templates and receipts. 6 months before the auction, Colin found it. He was selecting archival images for the catalog. The date was stamped on the back, July 1987. Number 42 appeared unfinished in Elias's hands nearly a year before the date on my label. Colin brought it to me after closing time. "Is this the same violin?" he asked. I said apprentices often posed with workshop instruments. He placed a catalog photograph beside it. The flame pattern on a one-piece back is as individual as a fingerprint. The dark diagonal near the lower left bout matched perfectly. "Is it the same violin?" he asked again. "Yes." "How much of it did he make?" I said Elias had begun it and I had completed it. That wording was technically accurate and designed to conceal the proportions. Colin asked whether the image belonged in the catalog. I told him including an unexplained apprentice photograph would create confusion that could reduce the auction price and hurt the music school. I did not order him to remove it. I did not have to. He slipped the photograph into a folder and built the catalog without it. At the conservation lab, after the X-ray exposed the buried label, Colin admitted that decision before I mentioned the photograph. Nora Bell closed her laptop. "The auction cannot proceed under the current attribution," she said. Colin asked whether the listing could be revised to Arthur Hale Workshop. Nora said not until they established who had created what, whether Elias had transferred any rights, and whether Margaret Sorrell had legal title to an instrument sold under a false description. The charity gala was 6 weeks away. Tickets were sold. Donors had pledged matching funds based on the expected auction price. The school had already promised 40 new instrument scholarships. Colin looked at me with the same expression I had seen on Anne's face when she showed me the shop's debts in 1987. "If this violin is withdrawn," he said, "Barlow could lose $500,000. I knew what he wanted me to say. I knew what I had taught him to say, find a version of the truth that keeps everybody paid. Instead, I asked Nora to cancel the lot. Colin followed me into the corridor. "You can't decide that alone. The attribution is false. Then correct it and sell the violin. Elias gets to decide whether his work is sold." Colin laughed once without humor. "You waited 38 years to discover ethics?" He was right to ask. The auction house located Elias through his repair business. He was 62 and still living outside Baltimore. When Nora called, he thought it was a scam. Then she sent the X-ray and a photograph of number 42. Elias agreed to come to Massachusetts on one condition: no reporters. We met at the Barlow School 3 days later. He carried the same brown leather tool roll he had used as an apprentice. His left hand trembled more than I remembered, but his right hand was steady when he lifted the violin from its case. He did not look at me first. He studied the edges, sighted down the fingerboard, and placed a knuckle against the back while Colin held the neck. He found the extended corners with his thumb. Then he turned the instrument toward the light and watched the maple flame move. "You made the varnish too dark," he said. It was the first thing he had said to me in 37 years. Julian wanted it darker. Julian didn't make it. Elias asked for a mirror and light. He looked through the end pin opening until he found the upper block. "My initials are still there," he said. I told him everything I had done after he left. I described the neck reset, the varnish, the bridges, and the sale. Then I described the debts, the water damage, and the 4 jobs the money had saved. Elias listened without interrupting. "Do their jobs belong on the label too?" he asked. "No." "Then why do you keep offering them as part of my name?" There was no answer that did not make my excuse sound like what it was. Colin showed him the auction catalog and the omitted photograph. He admitted finding it. He said he had believed the school's students would benefit more from a successful sale than from reopening an argument that might never be proven. Elias looked from my son to me. "He learned the shop method," he said. That hurt Colin more than if Elias had called him a liar. Margaret Sorrell joined us that afternoon. She was 78 and furious. Her husband had spent most of his career telling audiences that number 42 represented Arthur Hale's genius. She had written the same claim in the auction statement. Julian would have wanted the truth, she said, but he should have received it while he was alive. She asked Elias whether he wanted the violin returned. He said he did not know. Ownership and authorship had become tangled across 4 decades. My shop supplied the wood and sold the instrument. Elias supplied the design and most of the construction. I supplied the completion, adjustment, and false label. Julian supplied a lifetime of music that made the violin famous. Margaret legally owned it. The school had built promises around its sale. No single decision could make every part clean. The auction house's lawyers proposed a revised attribution. Hale Workshop, substantially made by Elias Ward and completed by Arthur Hale. They believed the lot could still sell, though perhaps for half the original estimate. Colin supported the proposal. Margaret was willing if Elias agreed. The school director said even a reduced sale could fund 20 scholarships. Elias asked whether I would sign a statement that he had designed and built the violin body before leaving. I said yes. Then he asked whether my shop would remove number 42 from lists of instruments made solely by me. I hesitated. That list appeared in books, appraisals, insurance certificates, and the records of collectors whose Hale instruments had increased in value partly because number 42 anchored my reputation. Correcting it could affect every instrument bearing my label. Elias saw the hesitation. "You still want to give me the truth only where it costs you nothing," he said. The next morning I called every dealer and appraiser who maintained a Hale registry. I gave them a written correction. I contacted the publisher of my catalog, Raisonné, and asked for an amendment. I told the auction house to release the X-ray and my statement to registered bidders. Then I asked Colin to arrange a public meeting at Barlow. He said a private correction would be sufficient. "It was a public reputation," I said. "The correction has to be public too. If you are deciding whether saving a workshop justified what I did, count the people I kept employed. Then count Elias, whose best work built my name while his own disappeared beneath a piece of paper. Good consequences do not turn stolen credit into generosity." The meeting was held in the school's recital room. Teachers, parents, former employees, collectors, and reporters filled every seat. Number 42 rested in its case on stage. Behind it, the X-ray showed 2 labels occupying the same space. I began with the sentence I should have spoken in 1988. "Elias Ward designed and built most of this violin." I explained how the instrument saved my shop. I named the employees whose jobs survived. Then I said none of them had asked Elias to surrender authorship, and none of their needs gave me the right to decide for him. I admitted removing his label, covering what remained, selling the violin as my own, and repeating the attribution for 38 years. Colin spoke after me. He displayed the photograph of Elias holding the unfinished instrument. He said he had found it before the catalog deadline and excluded it because he feared uncertainty would reduce the sale price. "I told myself I was protecting scholarships," he said. "What I protected was the clean version of my father's name because that version was valuable." Elias did not call either of us brave for confessing. He stood beside the violin and described the model he had drawn as an apprentice. He identified the corners, the arching, and the one-piece back. He also described my work honestly. The neck reset had improved the instrument. The varnish, though darker than he wanted, had aged beautifully. Decades of my adjustments had helped it serve Julian. Arthur did not do nothing, Elias said. He did something worse than nothing. He completed good work and decided completion made the beginning his. The auction was canceled that afternoon. Some donors withdrew. Others replaced part of the lost money after hearing the full story. The school delayed its scholarship expansion and launched a smaller campaign named for apprentice makers. Colin resigned from the auction committee but remained on the board after agreeing to oversee a new provenance policy. Collectors reacted exactly as he had feared. 2 Hale instruments scheduled for sale were withdrawn. Appraisers reviewed labels and workshop records. My prices fell for a while. Elias could have sued me. The auction house's lawyers warned that the old sale, the false invoice, and the decades of commercial use created questions no one could answer cheaply. Instead, he asked for an accounting of every time number 42 had been reproduced in a book, exhibition, or advertising campaign connected to my shop. The amount I owed him was not simple. Julian had owned the physical violin. My business had profited from its reputation. Elias had lost commissions that could never be calculated. We hired an independent mediator and spent 4 months reviewing records. In the end, I paid Elias the original sale price adjusted for inflation, plus a share of the licensing income my shop had earned from photographs of the instrument. It was far less than the value his career might have gained from proper credit, and far more than the $600 I once offered him. He accepted the settlement without calling it forgiveness. Colin and I had our own accounting to do. He blamed me for teaching him that a worthy institution could excuse an incomplete truth. I blamed him for seeing the photograph and choosing not to ask Elias himself. Both accusations were fair, and neither allowed the man speaking to avoid responsibility. For several weeks, Colin stopped coming to the workshop. When he returned, he brought archival boxes and a written rule for every future catalog. Uncertain evidence would be displayed, not explained away. Together we reviewed apprentice logs, photographs, and repair ledgers going back 40 years. We found 3 instruments on which assistants had done more work than my records acknowledged. None was another number 42, but all 3 attributions were corrected. The process did not destroy the Hale workshop. It made our history smaller, less perfect, and more accurate. The 4 employees whose jobs had been saved in 1988 responded differently. One told me I had done what any owner would have done. Another said she was grateful for the paycheck, but would never have accepted it if she knew whose work purchased it. Anne had died 6 years before the X-ray, so I could not ask whether she had suspected the truth. I found an entry in her ledger after the meeting. Payment from Sorrel, Elias Violin. She had known enough to write his name where nobody else would see it. Margaret decided not to sell number 42. Instead, she placed it on long-term loan to the Barlow School. Elias agreed on the condition that students would play it, not merely look at it behind glass. The school built a small exhibit outside the recital hall. It included the X-ray, the photograph Colin had hidden, a copy of my original sales invoice, and 2 pages from Elias's design notebook. My false label remained inside the violin because removing it might damage the rib, and because Elias said the concealment had become part of the instrument's history. Beneath the case, a new plaque read, Violin number 42, 1987 to 1988, created by Elias Ward, completed by Arthur Hale, played for 34 years by Julian Sorrell. The letters in our names were the same size. On the opening night, a 17-year-old Barlow student named Naomi Chen performed the slow movement of a Bach sonata on the violin. Elias sat in the front row. I sat 3 seats away. The instrument had changed since I last heard Julian play it. Its lower register was more open, and the high notes had lost some of their edge. Wood does that. It moves, settles, and remembers pressure in ways makers can influence but never own. When Naomi finished, the room stood. The applause belonged to her first, then to Julian, who had taught the violin how to sing for 3 decades. Then at last, some of it reached Elias. Afterward, he and I stood beside the exhibit. A child asked which one of us had built the violin. Elias pointed to the plaque. "Read both lines," he said. The child did. "I once believed putting my name inside an instrument made it mine. The X-ray taught me that a label can cover paper, but it cannot change the hands that shape the wood beneath it." Number 42 still carries my name inside. Now it carries the truth outside, where everyone can see it.